counter offer we ended up accepting, and I met my husband.
At that time, immigration is what formed this country. You know, is all these different ideas and different philosophies.
My father and David were like a two peas in a pod. They loved each other. Gloria will tell you they absolutely loved each other.
So the question that you have to ask yourself is not only do you have to challenge yourself to remember this history, but you also have to ask yourself, who will write yours?
And that's where home plate was. And if you hit it to left field, there was a chicken coop in left field.
My name is Irvin Moreno-Rodriguez, and I am the director of the Sarah and Sam Show for Holocaust Resource Center at Stockton University. I actually was first introduced to the history of the Holocaust in 7th grade. I went to Ventnor Middle School, and there was a Holocaust survivor that visited our school. Her name was Betty Grubenchikov, and she spoke about how she fled from Germany to Shanghai, China, and how her family escaped the Holocaust and then immigrated to the United States, where Betty lived in the Atlantic County area. And you know, being the child of immigrants, I listened to Betty's story, and it really resonated with me. You know, her adapting to a new culture, learning a new language, making new friends, you know, and having this experience really was unique and significant for me at that young age, where I felt that a lot of people didn't really understand me or my story. The first display case that visitors to our center see is a display case that is dedicated to Holocaust survivor Hannah Ehrlich. The display case is divided into 3 sections: life before the Holocaust, life during the Holocaust, and life after. When you talk about the history of the Holocaust, you cannot accurately, adequately explain what was truly lost, what was changed, without talking about Jewish life before World War II, before the Holocaust. And so every visitor to the Holocaust Resource Center, every student, I take time in showing them pictures of Hannah Ehrlich's family before the Holocaust. These photographs talk about a life where Hannah Ehrlich was born in Będzin, Poland, and lived. Photographs of her brother, of her family, of Hannah on vacation. Just like you or me, right? We have photographs of our families, of our siblings, of us going on vacation, of us just spending time with our family. And that was so important to Hannah. And it's so important for students to see, because during the Holocaust, Hannah lost almost everyone in her family, including her younger brother. And during the Holocaust, you can see photographs of Hannah imprisoned in the Będzin ghetto. She was later deported to Gross Rosen, and you can actually see the medallion that she was forced to wear during the Holocaust. And it was truly a horrifying experience, but Hannah lived. Her husband survived, Wolf Ehrlich. And just as important as the story of the Holocaust is, just as important as the story of life before the Holocaust is, it's just as important to talk about this history of resilience, which is Hannah and Wolf Ehrlich not only surviving, but having children, and their children having children, right? And you can actually see here an important photograph of Hannah's husband, Wolf, with the tattoo he received inside of Auschwitz on his arm, and then relaying that information to a younger generation, to his great-granddaughter, to his grandchild. And then even here, there's an artifact that's actually quite interesting. That artifact is this book inside the last part of that display case. And believe it or not, it is a copy of Mein Kampf. And you're probably wondering why a copy of Mein Kampf is on display here in the Holocaust Resource Center, particularly inside of the display case of Hannah Ehrlich. After the end of the Holocaust, Hannah and Wolf moved into an apartment in Germany. When Hannah was cleaning that apartment, she opened up a drawer, and inside of the drawer there was a copy of Mein Kampf, which is Adolf Hitler's manifesto, book that he wrote while he was in prison. That translates, the title translates to My Struggle. But inside this drawer, there was a copy of Mein Kampf left in the apartment. How did this copy end up in this apartment in Germany? Well, under the Third Reich, every German newlywed received a free copy of Mein Kampf as a gift from the Führer himself. And so, as Hannah was cleaning this apartment, she found this copy of Mein Kampf. Now, you would think you would want to forget everything. You would want to throw out this copy of Mein Kampf. You would want to throw out this Jewish star they were forced to sew onto your clothes during the Holocaust so that they would know you were a Jew, so that they would mark you as the other, as subhuman, eventually marking you for death. You would get rid of this medal that you were forced to wear inside of a concentration camp. But Hannah kept these items. And so when visitors tour the Holocaust Resource Center, I challenge them. Why do you think Hannah would have kept all of these really dark items? And the best answer that I can provide is that Hannah, although how terrible these items were, are, continue to be, she wanted us to remember. She wanted evidence that the Holocaust happened, and she wanted this evidence on exhibit for everyone to see. And this is not only a story of loss, it is a story of survival, of resilience, and of immigration. Because Hannah later resettled in southern New Jersey, where she opened up a poultry farm with her husband, Wolf. On this poultry farm, they had an egg stand. Inside of this egg stand, Wolf would sell crystals. And as people were coming down the Black Horse Pike, down to, as we would say, the shore, they would stop by this egg stand and also purchase a few crystals. But out of this small poultry egg stand crystal business, they developed a chandelier business. And if you wanted the best chandelier in southern New Jersey, you would go to the Ehrlichs for the best chandelier. And so it's a story of immigration, of thriving, of working hard, and recognizing and realizing the American dream here in southern New Jersey. Now, Hannah Ehrlich and Wolf Ehrlich have passed away. They are both of blessed memory, but we still have their items on display here in the Holocaust Resource Center to talk about all of these important themes for our students and for visitors to the Holocaust Resource Center. The next display case that I want to talk about and discuss is this display case dedicated to the memory of the Roma that were also persecuted by the Nazis during the Holocaust. The Roma, or as some would know as the Gypsies, although they would identify themselves as Roma, were also persecuted by the Nazis during the Holocaust and imprisoned in places like Auschwitz. Inside of Auschwitz, you had Jewish and Roma prisoners. This display case focuses on the Roma inside of Auschwitz and on the story of Holocaust survivor Jack Lewis. Jack Lewis was a musician from the Netherlands, and when we talk about resistance, oftentimes we talk about fighting back, fighting against the Nazis. But resistance during the Holocaust took many forms. In a time period in a world where perpetrators were trying to make victims feel subhuman, it was these forms of resistance like practicing your faith, practicing Judaism, keeping kosher, writing poetry, playing music. It was these forms of resistance that very much kept people's humanities alive during the Holocaust. And it's very important. So one form of resistance was Jack Lewis that would play music for the victims, like the Roma, inside of Auschwitz. As a thank you, the Roma carved this wonderful violin for Jack Lewis as a thank you for keeping their spirits alive. Why would you play music? Why would you listen to music? This is a question that I ask many of our visitors. You listen to music to feel better, to give you hope, to pass the day, to pass the time along. And so this violin, this wooden violin, was carved inside of Auschwitz by the Roma for Jack Lewis. Jack Lewis went back the next day, between August 2nd to August 3rd, 1944, to thank the Roma for carving this wonderful violin for him inside of Auschwitz. When he went back to thank them for this wonderful gift that was carved, they were no longer there. The Roma inside of Auschwitz were murdered in the gas chambers and then burned in the crematorium. Jack Lewis never properly thanked them for the wonderful gift that they carved for him inside of Auschwitz. But Jack Lewis survived. He would later become the band leader at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, and then would eventually resettle here in southern New Jersey, opening up a car dealership and some music shops in the area. Jack Lewis wanted a very special place to donate this violin as evidence that not only did the Holocaust happen, but that humanity thrived, that goodness, kindness thrived even inside of Auschwitz. And so Jack Lewis donated this violin to the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center to be forever on display, to remember not only the Jewish victims of the Nazis, but the non-Jewish victims of the Nazis, like the Roma. So I'd like to talk about the Portraits of Resilience, Holocaust Survivors of South Jersey project and permanent exhibit that we have here in the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center at Stockton University. The Portraits of Resilience exhibit was the first permanent exhibit of the Holocaust Resource Center, and it was actually unveiled in 2003 under the guidance and supervision of the former director of the Holocaust Resource Center, Gail Hirsch Rosenthal. She was really the inspiration behind the project, and she used the help and coordinated with Stockton students, photography students who were minoring in Holocaust and genocide studies, along with the help and direction of Professor Wendell White, who is a faculty member here at Stockton University, a wonderful artist and photographer, also a Guggenheim winning photographer here on campus. we have 82 portraits of Holocaust survivors from Atlantic, Cape May, and Cumberland counties. And when the Holocaust survivors were asked to participate in this project, we asked them to have something that they loved, something that they cared about within the portraits themselves. And so when you go through this presentation of portraits, for example, you have this portrait here of Jack Najman wearing the tefillin and practicing his Judaism, his faith. And he wanted audiences, he wanted future generations of students who would look at this portrait to understand and know how important his faith was to him. And as you look at the portraits, you will notice that all of them are in black and white, and it's very purposeful. The portraits are in black and white because it was an artistic choice. We wanted the audience to specifically focus on faces. And when you look at them through black and white photography, it's very easy to focus on the facial features, on the faces of the Holocaust survivors, more so than the background. Now, I've argued throughout the years that the Holocaust survivor and the background are really one and the same. When these students went out to interview these Holocaust survivors and to photograph the survivors, you can see very much in the background where they were most comfortable being interviewed. And many of these places many of these photographic sessions and interview sessions take place within the home of a Holocaust survivor. However, there are a few portraits here of Holocaust survivors who were interviewed and photographed here at Stockton. One of these survivors is Cy Techner. And so the question is, where is Cy Techner photographed? Well, he's photographed here at Stockton. And he wanted to show people, he wanted to show students that he felt comfortable here at Stockton. He felt comfortable speaking to students, the community, to wider audiences here at Stockton, and it was such an important place for him that he wanted to be here to take this photograph, which I think is just an amazing thought and idea. And we miss Cy Techner and many of these Holocaust survivors dearly, because the project really became this memorial inside the Holocaust Resource Center. And I say that because when a Holocaust survivor passes away in our community, and we do have a portrait of them, it is now our duty, our responsibility to hang their portrait here in this exhibit. So all of the survivors that you see here are what we call a blessed memory. They've passed away. And so we're really remembering the lives of Holocaust survivors and showcasing this important word, resilience. When students, when community members, when organizations tour the Holocaust Resource Center, we really tend to focus on the 4 R's, which is rescue, resistance, resilience, and righteousness. And so this exhibit talks about all 4 themes. For example, we have this gentleman over here, Sidney Simon, who during the Holocaust actually became a Jewish partisan, and so actively resisted and fought back against the Nazis during the Holocaust. Here we have Claire Cosden-Persky, a Holocaust survivor who was able to escape to England along with her family, but mainly because of the help of the Kinder Transport, which was this rescue operation in Czechoslovakia that rescued young children, young Jewish children, and found them safety in England. We have another portrait here of Rose Recknick. Now, Rose was an incredible Holocaust survivor. She was known for her fashion. She would light up the room whenever she was here on campus and came to speak to students. But Rose, in her book, which was named after the last words that her mother spoke and uttered to her, which is try to survive and tell the world. That is the title of Rose Recknick's memoir. And in her memoir, she talks about her aunt, Regina Saperstein, who was actually murdered inside of Auschwitz. She was actually hung because Regina, along with a group of other Auschwitz prisoners, they tried to blow up the crematoria inside of Auschwitz. They were not successful. They were caught and they were hung for everybody, for every prisoner to see inside of Auschwitz. So Rose has such a horrible Holocaust story, but again, you can see here how important it is, the portrait. Rose is smiling, and that's what we try to speak to our students too, right? Even though you went through the Holocaust, you went through this trauma, Rose still found the energy, the experience, the time to smile, right? And to speak to students about her story. And the last portrait that I want to highlight is actually this portrait of Nella and Leon Jaffe. We have thousands of students, of community members, of different organizations tour the Holocaust Resource Center, and we have students from many backgrounds, different school districts, different levels of Holocaust and genocide studies education. But students, every tour, always point out these two portraits. And this is a significant portrait, particularly for first-generation students, or as I like to call them, new Americans. Here you have an American flag inside of Leon's portrait. We know that Leon purposely moved the American flag into his portrait because when we look at the portrait of his wife, Nella, we can see that the American flag is not really on the porch. And so the question becomes, why did Leon move this American flag into his portrait, right? Something that he loved, something that he cared about. Well, we can sort of theorize why he decided to do that. Perhaps he wanted to show audiences that he loved America, the United States. He wanted to show how thankful he was for the United States for giving him a second opportunity, for being able to restart his life, for being able to create a newer generation, right? For being able to thrive here in the United States, in America. And I love these two portraits because you're going to need some imagination. On a wonderful Sunday afternoon, you can actually sort of think about Leon sitting on the porch with his wife Nella in their favorite places and enjoying life. And that's the beauty of these portraits of resilience. It's about creating a new life, learning a new culture, learning a new language, and overcoming great adversity, difficulty, and obstacles. And so there's a lot to learn from these portraits, and that's why we have them permanently displayed here in the Sarah and Sam Show for Holocaust Resource Center. The second permanent exhibit of the Holocaust Resource Center opened up in October of 2019. The exhibit, titled The Extraordinary Heroism of Ordinary People, the rescue of one Jewish family in the Netherlands, talks about a family, the Ullman family, in hiding for about 796 days in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. When visitors enter the exhibit space, they are greeted by the photograph that you see behind me, a typical street scene of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Why are visitors greeted by this photograph as they come into the exhibit? Well, how many of you have been to Amsterdam? I would guess not many. And that goes the same for our students. Students from Atlantic, Cape May, and Cumberland counties. Many of whom have not even left the county or even the state. And so to really teach the history of the Holocaust, to really understand the history of the Holocaust, you really need to understand not only the people, but the space, place, and location. And when you talk about the history of the Holocaust, you talk about cities in Europe like Berlin. You talk about Paris, Warsaw, Krakow, Amsterdam. But if you don't know what these locations look like, you're going to have a hard time understanding how the Holocaust impacted different countries, different cities, different peoples as the Third Reich took over Europe during World War II and the Holocaust. And so behind me, you have a typical street scene of Amsterdam. And I ask visitors and students, what do you see? What do you see in the photograph? Well, you see buildings. You see buildings that are really close to each other. And have any of you ever been in a building or lived in an apartment with shared walls, or maybe a townhouse, where you could hear your neighbor running around at 3 in the morning? It's really annoying, right? But you can see how close these buildings are to each other. Another geographic feature that's really prominent in the photograph are the canals. The canals that bisect and dissect Amsterdam. Canals that were very much there during the Holocaust and the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. And so when you build on water, when you build so close to canals, it's very difficult to build basements. So if you wanted to build a home on the water, you cannot have a basement. So what do you need to build? You need to build an attic space. So it's easy to talk about what you see in this photograph. It's more difficult to discuss what's missing from the photograph and what's missing from the background. You don't see any mountaintops. You don't see any forest. So during the Holocaust, if you were a Jew living in Amsterdam, space, place, and location could very much determine what options you had to try to survive and escape the Nazis during the Holocaust. So if you don't have any mountaintops, you can't trek and try to flee and escape through mountaintops to Spain and Portugal. You don't have any forest, so you couldn't hide in a forest and join a Jewish partisan fighting unit to fight back against the Nazis. What options did you have in Amsterdam and the Netherlands? Well, you had homes. And it's no surprise that when you learn about the history of the Holocaust, you learn about a young girl and her family in hiding, the story of Anne Frank. And often I have students and visitors to talk about Anne Frank hiding in an attic space. And I say, yes, she was a young girl in hiding, but it was the secret annex. It was more than an attic space. And you can see how that would play out in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, by looking at this photograph. And this exhibit not only talks about a young girl in hiding, it talks about a young boy in hiding, Leo Ullman, who was a child, a hidden child, in an apartment in Amsterdam for about 796 days. Leo Ullman survived. Anne Frank did not. And about approximately 80% of Dutch Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. And when you talk about the history of the Holocaust, space, place, and location is extremely important for students and other visitors to the center to understand how this history unfolded. And when you talk about the history of the Holocaust in Amsterdam, you have to talk about the canals. It's no surprise that in Amsterdam there was no ghetto. Instead there was a Jewish quarter. Why? Because you had the canals, you had these natural geographic boundaries that made it easier to segregate the Jews and deport them to concentration and death camps during the Holocaust. And so it's important that when visitors to the center, students to the center come here to view our exhibits, for them to understand that they are no longer in Galloway, New Jersey. They are no longer in Atlantic County. They are no longer in New Jersey. They are transported to a different part of the world. And it's important to learn about these different parts of the world, to understand not only the location, the space, place, location, but to understand the culture and the different peoples that exist in our world even today. At the end of a tour of our Holocaust Resource Center, I challenge every visitor, every student. They've learned about one part of history, a terrible, horrifying part of history we know as the Holocaust. My challenge to the student, to the visitor, is you learned about this history. You've learned about the Holocaust survivors of southern New Jersey. And you've learned about the millions of Jewish victims and non-Jewish victims of the Nazis, whose lives were cut short by a genocidal regime bent on destroying all of these different peoples, faiths, cultures, and ethnicities. But you've learned about the stories of survival, of resilience, of resistance, of righteousness. You've learned about these people and this history. But who will remember your history? Who will go back and preserve the documents, the photographs, the stories of your parents, of your great-grandparents, of your great-great-grandparents? We've provided you the tools with preserving your history. When you tour the Holocaust Resource Center, we give you the examples, the research, the ability, the expertise to go back and preserve your history. Because at the end of the day, this history, your history, is what makes southern New Jersey the best place in the United States and the world. So the question that you have to ask yourself is not only do you have to challenge yourself to remember this history, but you also have to ask yourself, who will write your